by saying it is an election year budget, and election year budgets typically are a little bit like a party mix. There's a little something for everyone. Now, what we find out is...
Licorice all sorts.
It's a little bit of a licorice all sorts.
Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to another big episode of The Wrap with your favourite podcast hosts. My name's Dougal Cameron. We've got Alex with me opposite. How are you, mate?
Terrific. I'm going great guns. Good to see the Eels get up in a big one.
We did
last night.
24-12, and a few terrible decisions gone against us. Mitch Moses was way up the sideline.
Whilst he was out, we should caveat that it was an awful decision that Morris was held up. Not surprising that the refs in the deep state are out to get Parramatta yet again after 2009. It's the resurgence of the Clintons. I wouldn't be surprised if the Clinton Foundation and Alexander Downer are involved in another deep state-based conspiracy funded by Soros, Get Up, and the like to bring down the working class club, I would call. The club with the most people who are the salt of the earth, the real Australians having a go, the Parramatta Eels Rugby League Club.
Not surprise me one bit. Now, if you're wondering how come our speech is so good and clear and where is the dribbling, it will be helpful to understand that our darling younger brother Andy is away on core camp, doing his thing with the boys in the bush.
That's right.
So we've just got two of us this week. We won't be bringing you the sports and culture report. We've just got the wrap for you. I hope you can deal with that for the interim week.
Speech pathologists everywhere in the Sydney area are crying this week because they don't get the business of the young DOS man.
Yes, they are. So what we like to do on this show, we like to cover some news, current affairs, some great topics, usually a domestic story and international story. That's what we're going to do for you today. But before we do, we like to have a segment called Jumping to Conclusions.
Yep.
Where we jump to a conclusion which might be a little bit out of the norm, out of the ordinary, but one that nonetheless we believe, something that we think should happen or that we think is deserving of criticism.
Yep.
So we're going to do one this week, and before we do that, actually, we're just going to give a quick shout out to the CHP page on Patreon. We've just signed up to Patreon. It's a way where we can get crowd-funded support, so we can develop the podcast. We want to be getting some new microphones, some new camera gear. I just picked this up this week, one of these bendy tripods.
It's not what it looks like
for $25 because that's what all the professional vloggers have. And we didn't think we would be those guys who'd be really walking around JB Hi-Fi filming ourselves.
We really hoped that we weren't going to be those guys,
but we are now those guys, and we would like some money.
Some walking around money.
But no, we will go straight into production.
It will go into production.
We'll put the link in the description, but that's enough of hustling you for money.
At least we're honest about it. I say, you know what, everyone else wants to slip you some kind of 2-minute elevator presentation about why they deserve money, and it kind of tugs on the heartstrings a little bit. Ours is not really an empathetic one. We just need more stuff for production.
Yeah.
If we're going to hit you up for money, at least we're going to be honest about it.
Yep.
We're not going to sting you outside of Martin Place when you're just getting off a train.
Yeah.
And sting you for something unrelated, sign you up for 2 years to a World Vision program where they show you the worst pictures going around in Africa. Look, we're honest, we're upfront.
Quick shout out to Will Black, who was our first donator. It's little as $1 a month. So the link is in the description. If you want to help fight the deep state. The Clintons have several $100 million.
$250 million. Whilst she managed to amass whilst Secretary of State.
While on a government salary.
On government salary, so at the taxpayer's expense. So work that one out, gentlemen. But also another big shout out to artist, author, super producer, Superman, and General Chico Olsen for his donation as well. So we really appreciate it. It's going to, I think, the best cause, which is finding the truth, to Veritas. So thank you again, and we really, really appreciate it.
All right, huge. So jumping to conclusions. Alex, what you got?
I'm going to say it. Bill Shorten is the least liked person in Australia by a long way.
Really?
Yeah, I'm going to say it.
By a long way. Interesting. That's a good conclusion.
Yeah.
Mine was NBA specific.
Oh, here we go.
Which was that the All-Stars should be competing in at least one other All-Star activity during that weekend. Be it the three-point competition, the dunk contest, or the skills competition. Because right now, everything else except the All-Star... Look, the All-Star game isn't even that fun to watch. but the other activities are even less fun to watch. So I would like to see the big names be up there and making those other activities watchable.
Okay, well, the thing is about this segment is that where there's supposed to be some kind of discussion, some kind of debate, it's difficult to do that when I literally made that suggestion to you, and so your conclusion is exactly my suggestion.
No,
so that obviously makes it a little bit more difficult, because your original suggestion for the All-Star game was that the dunk contest should be entirely constituted by those in the All-Star game. I said no, because we need some high flyers who are not necessarily good, actually good basketball players. So I said instead, my suggestion, my alternative fact, was that all All-Stars should have to contribute and play in at least one other skills challenge. So you've taken my suggestion, turned it into your jumping to conclusion, in arguably the least controversial jumping to conclusion we have ever had on the program.
First things first, I think the Sydney speech pathologists are celebrating right now after that segment, because there was a whole lot of dribble coming from that side of the table. But secondly, you know what? I'm a man of the people. I like salt of the earth people. I'm happy for my opinions to be informed by the old Vox Pop, and that's what I've done this week. So
also interesting that you, considering on the last show, you were getting up me for not paying credit to our Uncle Lachlan Cameron for his comment about grain waves being a revolution in chip technology. You got up me and you said, well, particularly when it's a unique idea, you should pay credit. On your first contribution to the program was both bastardised and uncredited. So I think an apology is in order, and also a retraction from your previous statement.
Well, look, I'm happy to hear about why Shorten is the most disliked person in Australia. And you know what? I think the people want to hear about the budget. I think the people want to hear about the budget from the horse's mouth.
Okay, well, I'm no horse, but I do have a mouth. Josh Frydenberg has come out during the week and delivered the budget. Now, this is an election year budget. We should caveat the following by saying it is an election year budget, and election year budgets typically are a little bit like a party mix. There's a little something for everyone. Now, what we find out is...
Licorice all sorts.
It's a little bit of a licorice all sorts. What we find out is that Josh Frydenberg, for the first time, his first budget as Treasurer, he is saying that he's going to get us back into surplus. Now, he's not saying we're currently in surplus, but he's saying that at the end of this year, we will be in surplus. Now, he's predicting a $7 billion surplus, which will be the first since a Howard Costello government. Now, what the pitch is, in many respects, for a small c Conservative government is the fact that they leave the money in the pockets of the people. Okay, that's the basic, one of the very, very fundamental principles. Now, we can, of course, I think what we should do is talk about the role of the state in terms of taxation and whatnot a little bit later on a more theoretical level. But I think I'll just go through a couple of the reactions, a couple of the key policy points of this budget in particular, because the budget, in truth, affects absolutely everyone, regardless of who you are. Now, so we've had Sally McManus, who's a big union boss, who's pretty much, I think she got in trouble for saying something along the lines of, this is a bit of a by the by, but she got in trouble for saying something about women dressing in skirts and high heels.
One of those ones.
Yeah, she's one of these ones. But her reaction is this: no plan for wage increases, no plan to make the big end of town pay their fair share of tax, cuts to education and health. This is what they believe in. More of the same. Hashtag budget 2019. Okay, Tim Costello, who is the brother of Peter Costello. He's a minister, a Christian. He said, "A surplus delivered, but the world's poor once again forgotten. Our aid budget is now the least generous it's ever been. This is not who we are as a nation." Get Up, of course, our favourites.
Love Get Up.
Soros-funded deep state operation that they are.
That's what we hear on the streets. We want more Get Up.
We want more Get Up. Get Up and go skis. Quote, "The budget is back in the black and back on track." Quote, question mark. "Unless you're a worker facing stagnant wages, renter facing a housing crisis, student forced to repay debt on minimum wages, unemployed person on New Start, our poorest are paying the cost of this surplus." Yeah. So... obviously, a lot of negative reaction coming from the left. But unsurprisingly, Tanya Plibersek also said cut $3 billion from TAFE and training, restore $500 million and expect congratulations. Now, so the government, Frydenberg's projecting a surplus of $7.1 billion in 2019-2020. And some of the policies we should have a look at as well. So how we got there.
We love that.
Now, we should also recognise the fact that this is what we call a paper surplus. This has not been realised yet. And if we cast our minds back to the inky blackness, that was the the Swan government. Now, Swanee famously said that Labor were about to deliver 4 consecutive years of surpluses, realised none from 4. So that was... and often this is the case, that in forecasting things like this, they never actually...
They're a bit generous.
They're often quite generous.
They're optimistic.
They're optimistic because you've got to remember...
They're hyperbolising their own assets.
They've got to remember that when talking about taxation and revenue, the government is relying on economic growth. Your taxation is ultimately going to be a function of economic growth and productivity, because your revenue is tax. And if people aren't earning any money, if people aren't making any money, you can't tax them anything, right? Now, so we should remember it is a paper surplus. However...
and often, if people aren't earning any money, the money that they get's often from the government. So it's like a double hit. It's like your income goes down and your liabilities go up at the same time. So by the exact same amount, actually. Maybe.
Yeah, unless you're a Keynesian, in which case there's a multiplier in there somewhere and they're able to generate money out of nothing. A little bit like fractional reserve banking. And I would encourage people at home to look at that. It is a massive scam. Anyways, so a couple of the highlights. Foreign aid, anyone who listened to the podcast last week would recognise the fact that we're not massive fans of foreign aid. It often ends up in the hands of those distributing it, and it often makes terrorists, as well as tyrannical dictators, orchestrated by the globalist bureaucracy, which is the United Nations, which is arguably, I wouldn't call it I wouldn't call it a terrorist organisation, but I would say it's definitely an oppressive organisation. So foreign aid, the budget papers reveal that foreign aid expenditure is expected to increase in real terms by 6.6% from this financial year to 2019-20, before decreasing by 11.8% by 2022-23. Good Frydenberg, as far as I'm concerned. Dukes?
Good Josh.
Good Josh. Climate change. $2 billion to fight climate change. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but...
Solyndra, maybe. We get another
or another subsidy. They're already heavily subsidising renewables. I don't know. Maybe they're going to pay people to stop using iPhones or whatever. Instant asset write-off. So this is a good one for small businesses. This is, again, this speaks to the more broad point, but the instant asset write-off, which allows businesses to write off assets such as tools or equipment, if you're a tradie, against their taxable income, expanded to now cover purchases under $30,000, up from $25,000. So that means that if you make a purchase,
maybe a $27,000 van, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. You can write that off against your taxable income, so you don't get taxed on that. Mm-hmm. So you obviously, when you talk to any kind of tax professional or anyone who's a financial advisor, the first thing that they will say to you is, we want to absolutely get you down to the absolute minimum taxable income that we can. Okay, because obviously the more taxable income you have, the more tax you're going to pay. That's the general rule. And a big one, I think they're taking a massive hint from Gladys's Berejiklian's win in New South Wales, an infrastructure spend of $100 billion over the next decades. Sorry. So that's about $10 billion a year, rough numbers.
I think it's New South Wales roads, I think a lot of it.
A lot of that will go to New South Wales. Because the states actually get their budget allocated from the federal budget.
Yeah, we need to change that. Not kick it. I reckon we kick a lot of stuff back to the states, but that's a subject for another day. Just kick it back. Kick it back. Just kick it to the states.
I mean, what's the point of having states if you're not going to kick it back to them?
I don't know, mate, but you should kick it. Get some interstate competition. Get the foot vote going. Where if one state's doing it poorly, go to another state.
And that's exactly what I think. I'm a much bigger fan of the US system in that respect. You can see people, for example, are leaving California,
going to Texas,
among other places, and Seattle in absolute droves because California
Sucks.
it sucks. It's the world capital of soy. You can't get a full cream milk coffee anywhere, and it's a massive hub for social justice warriors. Okay, so
No, California doesn't actually suck. Just saying it. You just have a bit suckier than what you could be.
I think there are aspects that do really suck, but there are aspects that are cool and awesome.
There are some cool aspects.
There are some cool aspects.
Whether
it's
pretty
balanced.
cool. Is LA Hollywood or California? What's California?
Yeah.
California
Los
LA?
Angeles is in. Okay. Los Angeles is in California.
Hollywood sucks a bit.
Hollywood sucks big time. And also San Francisco is in California.
Oh, Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley.
That's got some good advantages and some disadvantages.
Yeah. But it's basically the new globalist headquarters. So
Free Tommy. Free Seth Rich.
Check out the Clinton body count. It is surprisingly large. So Bill Shorten's reply.
Interestingly, both Shorten and the Libs are doing tax cuts.
Yeah.
They're both doing tax cuts, which is interesting.
Yeah. It is surprisingly interesting. It is interesting, also surprising. Because what you tend to see is that the thing is, this is why my estimation Labor ends up with big deficits, is that they like to spend a lot of money. So my estimation is that now that the Libs looks like they may give up the keys to the lodge, Bill Shorten is banking on the fact that they've got a little bit of money in the bank. He's going to cut a bit of tax, but he's also going to spend a lot of money. So we will see this deficit blow out quite a bit. So Shorten said he's going to give high income tax benefits for those earning 45 grand and below, and he will match Liberals' tax cuts for 48 grand for the people earning between 48 and 126 rubber band banks over forward estimates only. Labor won't change, however, the 32.5% tax bracket to 30 cents. So what a lot of people are saying at the moment is that around this particular budget is they're saying that Scott Morrison is giving a lot of big tax breaks to the big end of town. And so what they mean by that is that basically what's happening is that Fairway in the future, I think by about 2022, 2023, around that, the tax cuts implemented, Morrison wants to bring it more, make it a less progressive taxation system. So basically, everyone's kind of paying around 30 to 32.5 cents on the dollar for their marginal tax bracket. And so what that ends up meaning is that if you're earning 200,000 compared to someone earning 45,000, your tax break ends up being a lot larger, right? Because obviously, if you bring that marginal tax rate down, if you're earning more money, you're going to save more money than if you're earning less money. Now, I think this is a good opportunity to bring in the idea of progressive taxation, and also to bring in what this means in terms of the state's role in the budget in general. Now, Dougal, I'm going to kick it to you. What was your headline reaction from number one regarding the surplus? Number two, what would you say to someone who says that a budget is deeply unfair for making the marginal tax rates more equal?
Well, first thing I'd like to say is that I like the surplus just because I don't fancy myself having to pay it back for so long down the line.
With interest. That's the big killer.
With interest, right?
So the Chinese
a lot of people talk about, I don't want my kids to deal with climate change. A less popular but potentially more valid kids argument is I don't want my kids to pay off all the damn debt. And so that's something I'm kind of happy about.
Positive reaction.
The second thing about the flat income, I don't mind the flat income because obviously income tax, because if you earn more, then you're obviously going to pay more, right? It's not like you pay less amount, right?
Yeah.
It's just the same percentage, which, I kind of don't mind. And if you think about it, it's like 32 cents, they're bringing it down to 30 cents. It's like, just think about that for a second. Let's say you work a 9 to 5 job, you start earning your own money around 11:30 in the morning. just before lunch, I think you start earning your own money. But 9 to 11:30, you're working for the government.
Yeah.
You're working to pay Tim Soup Parmesani.
Yeah.
Gillian
the Reptilian
Gillian
Triggs.
the Reptilian Triggs. You're working for the Clinton Foundation.
Get Up.
You're working for Get Up. There's you're working for a lot of other people before you start working for yourself and for your family.
Did you remember there was also
the deep state? You're working for the deep state. You're working for the, and I would like to see that number go down. I have to tell you. Now, if it was feasible, I know you have to pay off this debt, so it might be a future, ideal, hopesy aspiration. But I would like to see that number, maybe 10:45. I think would be like a good time to start working for yourself. That's a good short-term goal, I think, at some point.
Yeah.
I reckon around the morning tea time would be good. Not just a bit further away from lunch.
Yeah. So tax cuts in general, they're a little bit taboo, and I'm not exactly sure why. I don't think the argument made is actually a good argument. Now, in terms of actual statistics, we should recognise the fact, my favourite saying, that of Australia's income tax, so of all the income tax, about a third gets spent on social security and welfare. Okay, so that's redistributed. So that's redistribution. That's essentially Marxism, if what we're getting down to. Well, it's exactly what it is. That's redistributionist. But tax cuts across the board have been done before. And I think there's a mischaracterization where people often say, well, how are you going to pay for stuff if you cut taxes, right? This is a good question, and I think it hasn't actually been framed properly. If you go back to the Reagan administration, now Reagan and Thatcher,
the Reaganomics.
So you've got Reaganomics and the Thatcherites. They kind of operated at the same time. There was a small difference between the tenure, but what Reagan was able to do, Reagan was able to implement kind of tax cuts fairly swiftly across the board, and because business and economic growth was able to kind of propel itself more rapidly, he actually ended up collecting more tax revenue. Okay, because just because you increase tax rates doesn't mean you get more tax revenue. Because number one, there's less incentive for business. Number two, less incentive for investment. Now, because this is a fundamental incentive question, right, when you talk about taxes. What you have to prove if you're the government, when you tax the citizens, is that you're a better spender of their money than they are. Okay, that's for every single dollar. That's what you have to, and by better spending, that covers the social costs as well as kind of all the operating costs as well, I would say. But that's the basic argument you have to make, and I don't think the kind of the small c conservatives actually make that argument properly. They just kind of say, oh, well, we just like keeping our own money. It's like, well, why do you want to keep your own money? Because the government is saying that every time they tax your money, that they spend your money better than you do. And that's actually quite confronting. And a lot of libertarians will say it's just immoral, because you're using the full force of the state to back it. Now, so I would also contend that high tax rates don't necessarily equal higher tax revenue, because otherwise you just tax at 99% and still get the same amount of revenue. Now, in terms of the incentive problem, the thing about kind of making the tax... Yeah?
I'll just caveat that.
Sure.
There's probably a good chance that if you lower the tax rate, you probably will get less tax revenue. Lowering the tax rate does not mean you're going to get more tax revenue.
I would say...
it does not mean it's a pretty hard argument to make, to say that Frydenberg is going to will be able to fund building the roads by lowering the tax rates.
I think you can make that argument. I can tell you. I reckon you can seriously make the argument, because it's.
But what if you go to 5% tax?
Yeah. That
doesn't mean you're going to have a lot more government revenue than you do at 30%, because the tax rate's lower.
Okay. Well, if you're assuming that the only way that the roads get built is by the government building them, then potentially, then I can see your point. But if you want to go full libertarian would say that the roads...
No, but what I'm saying is that the idea that because the government's going to lower the tax rate at this point from 32% to 30% for people earning 44 to 200,000, I think it might be a stretch to say that the government's going to get more revenue from that.
I think they will. I honestly think that this is not kind of beyond...
Beyond the pale?
It's not beyond the pale. I don't think this one.
Okay.
I think this is actually quite reasonable. Particularly since we've already got such high high wages as well. You've got to kind of give business some incentive, and I think if you give them, you see what's happened in America with the US economy. Trump has just totally awoken the dragon.
Sure.
He has.
They're still running pretty big deficits though in America.
They're running big deficits. I agree. I don't think that's his choice so much as he's got to get something through the House, because he's got all these damn globalist rhino Republicans in there. But I think you can see what happens. Like once you kind of take the training wheels off, if you can really kind of kickstart this thing. And I have a lot of faith in Australia as an economy. I just think we're just kind of really side-bagging ourselves with massive minimum wage, massive taxes. It's like, you got to run real hard just to get off the mark.
Yeah, I get it. I'm just saying on a specific point, like there's no question the economy will function better with lower taxes, but I'm just saying, will the government get more revenue from less taxes?
I think they will. It happened with Reagan.
Okay.
So, and I think there is a precedent for it.
So why wouldn't the Labor government, if they wanted more money, lowered the taxes?
Because it's a hard sell for them to make. It's a hard sell for Liberals to make, because you have all these bureaucracies which rely on kind of the enlargement of the state, and it's not because what the Labor Party and the left have done is set themselves up as for the working class, right, and for the kind of the poor and the downtrodden. If you say we're going to give tax cuts across the board, particularly for business, that kind of goes against this whole oppressor narrative.
It's PR.
100% is PR. Okay. Why else would you be advocating for a high minimum wage? It's purely PR. It makes no sense economically.
Okay. There's
a lot of myths that go around, and it's just purely PR. Often these things are, for example, great economics but bad politics, and this is particularly for a union-funded Labor Party. It's extraordinarily difficult to say, oh yeah, we're going to get rid of the minimum wage. It's going to make everything a whole lot better, but we can't take your money in our unions. And the unions will run a hit campaign against the Labs. Anyways, just trying to see if there's anything else we want to have a look at.
You got anything else?
I think an interesting thing. What did you think of Bill Shorten saying that he wanted, what did he say, half of all cars to be electric by 2030? Is that what he said?
He might have. I think I heard something about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get the exact.
It's good to have real facts on the podcast so we can get them. Why don't you just pull that up, Jamie? Steinberg, going to pull that up. We have. I don't mind the idea of electric cars. This is one thing I understand. Now, this is a dumb question. I know it's going to be a dumb question, right? So, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I don't know. And you know what? I don't mind asking dumb questions. If you've ever been in my class, I would have asked a lot of dumb questions. My question is this, right? We use coal to generate electricity, right? Tell me why burning coal to generate electricity, which electric cars use, is cleaner than using petrol, which burns petrol to make it go. Because you get electricity from coal.
Well, I assume it will run in conjunction with the probably a 50% renewables target as well.
But what I'm saying is, you might say it's a renewables target, but are they generating the energy for an electric car from windmills? Or are they... Because my assumption is they're just getting it from coal anyway. Like, I assume there's someone who can provide a relatively simple answer for that, but I don't understand how, if it's running on electricity, it's any more clean than a fossil fuel, because you're burning fossil fuels to get the electricity anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point, and there are a bunch of issues surrounding renewables and electric cars, particularly. This is why I said, do you remember when I said electric cars may be the biggest pyramid scheme?
Yeah, but I just think there should be an answer for that, and there probably is.
Well, because, like, for instance, you talk about...
There's probably a few environmentalists banging their head on the steering wheel of their car as they listen to this on the way to work. On the
proverbial keyboard. But you should also remember that a construction of an electric car is not super environmentally friendly. A construction of cars is not super environmentally friendly anyway. To actually get the electric car in the first place is not super environmentally friendly.
Sure, but you get to show your friends, and everyone thinks you're a cool Leo DiCaprio environmentalist.
Yeah. So, Bill Shorten said that by 2030, was to make 50% of all new cars electric.
Yeah.
That's again...
well, look, if people want to buy electric cars, and if they do help the environment, in fact, go and do it. I'm skeptical. This is just probably one of the things the government will probably get wrong. I just feel like it won't work very well, but it might. I just think that limiting the consumer freedom of Australian citizens is generally not a good thing.
It's pretty tyrannical, don't you think, to limit...
It is pretty tyrannical. What China does is China, like to get a car in Shanghai and drive it on the road, it's very expensive. It's not actually the car that costs a lot of money, it's actually getting a plate, because the plates are issued by the government. And so what happens is, the government makes the plates very expensive for petrol cars and diesel cars, but makes the registration for electric cars a lot cheaper. So that's one way they do it, but to get that done, you actually have to have very high petrol plate policies to start it off, which, you know, is not very good, but that's what China does. China wants the electric cars. China's all for the electric cars. China's, I think, the world leader in solar energy development. I'm going to fix the camera because I think Alex might have fluffed it.
Okay, well, I think that covers... but yeah, so Bill Shorten came on Alan Jones' radio show and said that it only takes 8 to 10 minutes to charge an electric car, which is, according to experts, at least from my understanding, patently false. It takes closer to 8 to 10 hours to charge. And also, what you have to do if you're going to make 50% of all new cars electric, you have to have the infrastructure in terms of electric batteries and recharging stations. Can you imagine 50% of all new cars being electric? Like how expensive that would be to roll that out? Because if you're the state and you're saying...
I assume the government... Would the government fund the electric charging stations?
They would have to.
I'm sure Tesla would do it. Tesla has a lot of car stations charging around in America, I think.
Yeah, but not in Australia.
Yeah.
So 2030 is 10 years.
Yeah.
Do you imagine the cost? You imagine like how much the NBN costs. Imagine how much probably an electric car stations would.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll see what Bill's got to say about it. I'd love to hear the details of it. We got anything else? I think we've... Oh, what about the policies of the budget? Have we got any on the policies of the budget anymore?
Yeah, so... Morrison's promising one-off energy assistance payment of at least $75 to several categories of welfare recipients. $528 million for Royal Commission into the disability sector. There's the tax relief. 94. This is, you know, I'm going to say this is great, Morrison and Frydenberg. I'm prepared to get, like, you know, I don't want to give these guys a massive rap. I don't think they deserve it most of the time. But I'm going to say this, from my perspective, 94% of workers will pay no more than 30 cents tax for every dollar they earn from 2025. I think it's
a good line.
I think it's effing awesome that they're doing that. I think every time the government comes to realisation that the people spend the money more efficiently than the government, I think they deserve a massive rap. And I think that we will see, I'm really hoping that we will see kind of a rallying around that and that public shows their support for that. Because that's every time that the government cuts taxes, I'm happy to stand by it. I think if the government flips a coin every week and decides what taxes they're going to cut, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Tax cuts across the board. That's my policy.
Alrighty. We got anything more before we move on to our international story?
No. Otherwise I'll dribble.
Brunei Sharia laws. Brunei Sharia laws. Now, before I get onto this, I did give a plug to these bendy flexible tripods, and they're very useful for vlogging, but they're also great as a toy to play with during the podcast, because you can bend them around like that.
I think you're distracting yourself and the viewers.
You can bend them around like that.
Yeah, I reckon you might put it down now.
Okay, I'll put it down. Let's go on to Brunei Sharia laws.
Yeah.
So, Brunei is a small country sandwiched between two Malaysian states on the island of Borneo. Population of about 400,000 people. Now, Brunei is introducing laws making anal sex and adultery punishable by stoning to death. Sorry, Grandma. I know Grandma loves watching the show. I don't want to scare you, but that's what's happened. and I had to use that language.
Well, Grandma worked as a pharmacist, ran her own pharmacy for 15 to 20 years, so I guarantee you she's heard and seen more rogue things.
Okay. More specifically, offences such as rape, adultery, sodomy, robbery, and insult or defamation for Prophet Muhammad will carry the maximum penalty of death. Lesbian sex carries a punishment of 40 strokes of the cane and or 10 years of jail. The Sultan of Brunei, whose name's pretty hard to pronounce, but I'm going to have it try. Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah says, I want to see Islamic teachings in this country grow stronger. Now, a big problem for the progressive left these days is that to identify and protect both Islam and LGBTQI, I think A as well is on the end now,
Plus.
is going to be very hard because these two are inevitably going to run into each other. It's like the unstoppable force of the Pride Parade versus the immovable object of the
hardcore Sharia law.
Hardcore Sharia law Wahhabis. And
fatwas.
they don't actually like it's. I'll tell you what's funny though is that the Pride people are all for Islam, right? Because they reckon they're fully on the the progressive train.
I wouldn't say that they're for Islam so much as they are totally against Islamophobia.
Yeah. So anyway, then you realise that like all the hate crimes and all the homophobia still left in the Western countries actually comes from the other group of protected category.
Protected species in the national park of victimhood.
Yeah. They're going to run into each other, and it's going to be a funny competition who wins the oppression Olympics out of those two, because one of them's going to have to. There was recently that story of that school in England,
in Birmingham,
where there was a protest against the teaching of, I think, LGBTQ stuff in a school.
Yeah. And
it was all the Muslims in the school who were protesting it. And there were like several hundred of them, I think, but there was no coverage of that, right? But, you know, the Women's March or whichever, you know, Sleeping Giants, there was a march against Sky News after the Christchurch thing that got like a lot of coverage, which had about 20 people.
Particularly from the ABC and SBS, the publicly funded broadcasters.
Yeah. And so I hate that I have to say this because you shouldn't have to, but I'm going to have to anyway. That I don't have anything against Muslims. In fact, I have probably more Muslim friends than any of the progressive left in Australia has, right? I lived in a dormitory in China where the dominant language was Russian because we had a whole group of people from Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, blah, blah, blah. A lot of very nice, some of the funniest and loveliest people, right? Now, they're awesome until, you know, you ask, do you think gayness should be illegal? And it's like, look, mate, it's just in the Quran. You just got to do it. They got to go to jail. And I'm going to just do a quick little examination of how LGBTQI plus issues are treated. Just generally, no religious examination regardless, and we're going to see if there's any causation or correlation. Okay, so list of countries that stone or execute gay people: Afghanistan, Iran, Mauritania, Sudan, Nigeria, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Somalia. Now, it brings me no pleasure to bring you the fact that all those countries are at least 90% Muslim.
I think except for Nigeria.
I think Nigeria, yeah, you might
Nigeria
be right.
is 50%.
Nigeria is 50%.
The rest are north, I believe, of 92%.
Okay, then list of countries who publicly lash gay people: Indonesia, Qatar, Malaysia, United Arab Emirates. They're all above 50% Muslim. Now, I think, I don't have a problem with Muslim people. I quite like Muslim people. You know, you go to the mosque, do your thing, pray to, Allah. Pray to Allah, pray to Mecca, do your Ramadan, cool. That's interesting. I'm happy to engage with that. That's cool, right? Now, the point where 52% of British Muslims believe homosexuality should be illegal is where I start having issues. When you start saying that criticism of Islam or the Prophet Muhammad should be illegal, that's where I have issues. Like the Grand Mufti in Australia suggested, when you have significant sectors of the Islamic community sympathising with suicide bombers against Israel.
Yeah.
That's where we have issues. When you are sympathetic to the 9/11 bombers, I have issues now. By and large, there's not a majority. There's not a majority of Muslims in Australia who I think would make homosexuality illegal. But to say that is not a significant enough sector that we should be worried about it would also be wrong, right? So even if it was 10% of British Muslims who believed homosexuality should be illegal, that may still be an issue worth worrying about. And so all I'm going to say is that if we need to understand that if Islam is demanding total submission, we have to understand what is demanding the total submission, right? And we have to actually understand the text. And although there's definitely some bad stuff in the Bible, definitely some bad stuff in the Torah, what we should be considering as the country, as far as I'm concerned, is the relationship between ideology and action, right? So if you want to go and believe in a flying spaghetti monster, I don't mind, but then don't support physical attacks against people who don't believe that. That's kind of, your freedom ends, your freedom to move your fist ends where my chin begins. Alex, what are you thinking about that? Oh, before I throw it to Alex, I'll just give a quick, Ellen DeGeneres and George Clooney are trying to boycott the hotels owned by both the Sultan of Brunei and agencies of Brunei. And hundreds of people have protested outside the Brunei-owned Dorchester Hotel in England, I believe. Also, it was Tash Olsen who submitted the tip, who wanted us to talk about this. So shout out to Tash Olsen, one of our loyal followers, subscribers, community members. Alex, what do you think about the Brunei situation?
Just to address your earlier point in terms of the kind of the victim oppression Olympics, this is why it is often seen that the revolutions of the left invariably eat themselves, because it's extraordinary. Because if you don't recognise the fact that people are unique, there is actually underlying kind of the certain available characteristics, whether you're gay or Muslim, whatever. There are certain undeniable individual characteristics that get overlooked, and so what ends up happening is that these revolutions end up eating themselves because there is too much overlap between the categories, so much so that no one can really identify who the victim is. And when the currency, when the respect, when the virtue is in who is the greater Muslim, it ends up like kind of a sea of piranhas, where they just kind of eat themselves to the extent that no one really knows which way is up. And this is kind of, I don't think it's totally happened yet, but I think this will be one example, because it has been picked up a little bit, which may kind of put the light on that really kind of dark aspect of the left. Anyone who understands that there is a political aspect of Islam, which is different from the kind of the purely theological aspect of Islam, would understand that in the cases where Muslims become, it appears, the majority in a country, the Western rule of law, the idea that everyone is equal before the law, no longer applies. As soon as Islam becomes the doctrine of the majority, Western perceptions of what is democratic often get thrown out as well. This is why you have Sharia law follows almost immediately from the progression towards a majority. So the issue that you have is that whenever these Islamic teachings become the doctrine, the law of the land, is that they get taken literally and then they get backed by the full force of the government and by the courts. So is it any... I mean, when we talk about, well, the teachings of Islam are entirely peaceful, I would say, well, the teachings of Islam have been indoctrinated into legal principles in these countries, and we have open discrimination with carrying death penalties against gay people. So I would say, well, if you're going to say that the doctrine is entirely peaceful, I would say, well, look at the countries practicing the doctrine, and you would find that it's not that entirely. I think that the left, if they actually do care about gay rights and they care about the discrimination of against minorities, with real tangible consequences, not imagined slights against the number of gay people in movies, or of the number of gay people as in C-suite positions, I would say, why don't you take a look at the real discrimination which occurs, which is in the Middle East. It's absolutely appalling. It's disgusting. It should bring fear and sickness to anyone who values the rule of law, or anyone who values equal treatment under law. This is exactly why the government should treat people as individuals, and that the body of law which governs a nation, if it wishes to progress in any way other than backwards, should recognise the individual as absolutely supreme and paramount in any legal decision or doctrine. We should oppose the administration of Sharia law here, I think, absolutely, and condemn it entirely. Because the thing is, the people who are allegedly the most vulnerable, the gays, are going to be the first to go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to pick you up on that. So let's say we do individual in all legal cases related to the government. Would you be against Islamic immigration? Would you treat every person individually who wants to come to Australia?
But you've also got to recognise is that there are several countries which I think have a higher percentage of kind of radical Muslims than there are others.
Sure.
Would I put an entire Muslim ban? I don't think I would put an entire Muslim ban on. No, because that's what that would. Do I ban? I would. I would take it case by case.
So you wouldn't do the US highlight several countries.
But that's right. Yeah, I would be. That would be fine if there were several countries which are. I'm talking about from the remaining countries outside the radical ones.
Okay.
Like I'm okay with the Muslim ban in the sense that it's the Muslim ban was not so much a permanent ban, but it was a pause until you can kind of get an idea of who was coming in from these. I think it was 7 majority Muslim countries. It wasn't actually even really a Muslim ban.
Yeah, sure. What I'm saying is that I'm conflicted between the idea of treating everybody as an individual, and then that recognising that from some countries or broad identity group in particular, there is some problems.
Yeah.
I
can see the kind of the contradiction there.
Yeah.
But I would say in terms of your first obligation is to treat your own citizens as individuals.
Sure.
I don't think you like. Yeah, I don't know. Look, obviously, kind of the individualist thing kind of breaks down a little bit if you start talking about majority Muslim countries. But at the same time, it's unbelievably difficult to be able to adequately identify what are the individual characteristics coming from people overseas anyway.
Yeah, sure. So I think individualism is good, and I'm pro-individualism, and I think individualism works in most cases, but I also think there might be limits to it, right? Just in the sense that because we don't... Look, I don't know, it's a hard one to explain, but I think it needs a bit of thought, and I think it's then hard to be a full-time individualist when, like, there are sometimes group characteristics which are important.
Yeah. I think, and again, it kind of goes to that. that it's like a statistics thing. At some level, it is like you're not saying, for example, that no one says all Muslims are terrorists, but for whatever reason, there are in some parts of the world a high correlation between faith and acts of terrorism. That doesn't mean, of course, like you can't flip it the other way. So yeah, I think the individualist thing does break down to a degree, but yeah, I think we should probably consult some other people on this one. I think get another outside opinion, because I reckon there's probably an argument to be made for individualism on this one, but also,
well, I just doubt it, because you're just taking, like, there's definitely some good, hardworking, kind of American dream people who would be coming from those majority Muslim countries who would be banned on that travel ban.
Yeah.
And they're getting punished collectively for the actions of their country mates. But then again, do you just take a Polish safety approach and just let none of them in? Which is a question I don't know the answer to.
Yeah, I don't know either. Ben Shapiro did an interesting... Have you seen the video where he breaks down the kind of the numbers based on the Pew Research, which suggests that obviously his definition of radical is maybe not the same definition that other people would apply, but his argument was that when you look at the numbers and you break down the polling data by each individual kind of majority Muslim country, you see that a lot... it ends up being the majority of the global Muslim population believe in some aspect of Islam which is widely seen as radical. That includes like not being able to draw Muhammad, or not, or saying that suicide bombings in some cases are justified. You know, stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I did meet, that's true. I did meet an interesting guy though when I was in China. I think was from, I'll just get this back on. Who I think was from, is this not, oh, the card's full. Anyway, I think we'll just wrap it up there then. This did end up going for a bit longer than I thought it would, because we were just doing 2 topics. Should we do a quick finish up?
Yeah, sure.
I'm nominating Beta Male of the Week, and I'm just going to give it to them. A New York theatre company who posted a project to Backstage who wanted to have people of colour paid more than white people, and wanted to increase accountability of white people to people of colour in the production process.
Disgusting.
So they get...
that's blatant racism.
So they get a Beta Male of the Week. And Alex, do you want to just give us a quick rundown of why Bill Shorten's the least liked person in Australia?
I think Bill Shorten's the least liked person in Australia because considering the track record of absolute catastrophic, diabolical fumbling and bumblings of the Liberal government over the past couple of years, this election should not even be in question. And if you look at the one common denominator of why the Labor Party is not ahead, it's Bill Shorten, and the reason is the following. Because the gap between the two-party preferred and the preferred Prime Minister is so large. And the only reason that's so large is not because the Liberal guy is liked, but because Labor, Bill Shorten is disliked so much. And if you took a poll, I reckon, if you genuinely took a poll of almost all Australians and had a crack and said, who do you think is the least likeable person, or who do you think you would least like to spend an afternoon in an airport with, I reckon a lot of people would say Bill Shorten. Now, of course, it's anecdotal and this is empirical, but I think the polling data suggests he's not very popular, and the way he goes about things, he's a little bit weird and he's a little bit creepy. And also, can I just say for the record, there's a bunch of allegations which have been hidden beneath the surface with Bill Shorten, including sexual assault allegations and fraud allegations, for whatever reason we're not reporting on. The man, he's a union thug. He's an absolute derelict when it comes to knowing about electric cars, because he thinks they charge in 8 to 10 minutes. This is not an iPhone, buddy, and even an iPhone don't charge that fast. I would say there could even be daylight for a second.
Okay, very cool. Well, we will see you next week. Thanks for being with us if you're still here. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube.
SoundCloud as well.
SoundCloud, iTunes. Hit the subscribe button. comment on our stuff. It helps us with the algorithm. Maybe even share it if you really like it. And if you really extra like it and you want to throw some sauce our way, throw some chippers this way into these coffers, you can find us on Patreon. Link in the description.
Cool. Thanks for being with us.